Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit today about a kind of unlikely journey of being a second-time founder with a stint of being an investor in the middle at a venture capital firm called The Engine. Patrick briefly mentioned this, but my pathway to building my first company was a little bit unlikely. I had been really focused on what I would call social justice and nonprofits for about a decade. I worked in India for 5 years doing maternal and child health work, and by the end of that stint, I didn't think that the nonprofit model was the best way to sort of allocate resources in a sustainable way, and decided to pivot towards company building. To do that, I went back to the United States, started at MIT, yay, MIT GSW, with the intention of trying to figure out how to start a company. It is worth noting through all of this, I'm not an engineer, I am not an ideas person. If you asked if I was ever going to invent something amazing, the answer would be no. But I have a worldview where I think that building companies can be sort of the most impactful thing that you can do for a community. And certainly if you look at Europe, Poland, all of these global sort of communities, I really do feel like entrepreneurship can create tremendous impact. Before I keep talking, is anyone here a founder currently? Can you raise your hands? 2, 3, okay, a few. Does anyone want to start a company? Okay, a couple. And then are the rest of you corporates? Sir, what do you do? Oh, cool, okay. I don't think I'm supposed to take questions and answers, but if you guys have questions as we go through, I'm more than happy to sort of take feedback from the audience. Okay, so I wanted to just run through some tactical lessons about sort of my time from working over the last 14 years. So Rest Devices was a company, when I went to MIT to start to pursue my business degree, I basically talked to a computer science professor who I knew well, and I said, do you have anyone who has a great technology or a great idea that they're looking to commercialize? There were 3 kids who had just graduated from mechanical engineering. They had a novel sensor, and they were trying to figure out what to do with it in the market. So I met them. We found that we had very good compatibility as a founding team, which is incredibly important, and we effectively started the company. The story of Rest Devices is sort of crazy. So it's a sensor that you could put on any fabric and measure pressure, moisture, and movement. So it was really good at figuring out sleep and breathing patterns. And then it was trying to figure out what were we going to do with it. Initially, we looked at the medical device market, so being able to think about things like sleep apnea, insomnia, parasomnias. But in America, some of you might know this, the insurance market, the health insurance market is a disaster. And so we actually pivoted and went into consumer products, so making a onesie, like a little, I don't know what it's called in Poland, but basically a little wearable sensor for babies to be able to look at how to help their parents figure out how to help the babies sleep better. As I was doing that, it's worth noting that baby monitors were typically purchased by mothers, right, by women. And when we went out to go raise venture capital money, pretty much every male investor that we talked to said, this is not an interesting market. Why would we put money into this? This isn't a scalable market. What are you doing? And I was like, terrific. So then every investor said, if you can prove that you have sales, then we might invest in you. So being the very stubborn person that I was, I went out and raised purchase orders from the #1 retail chain in the United States at the time, Babies R Us. We ended up somehow getting our way into a nationwide expansion to 500 stores, getting a bunch of digital pilots, and then somehow figured out how to premiere with Intel, the big chip company, at the main stage at CES. That was in 2014. So we premiered at CES. We got probably 1 billion different media hits, and we sold out of all of our product literally immediately. We were doing like a sale every 60 seconds, and all of the inventory that we had purchased was gone. At that point, then we went to this cash flow cycle, where as a hardware company, does anyone here have experience with hardware companies? Anyone? Yes. Okay, so you need money to buy, to sort of run a hardware company. And we went into this big cash cycle where we didn't have any money. We tried to raise money from investors and ended up being millions of dollars in debt, right, for a variety of different reasons. It was crazy, and it ended up being okay. But it was such a stressful experience as a founder that it gave me a few key lessons, all right? One is most things are recoverable, right? So I think that if you're building a company, or if you're an investor who's investing in companies, or if you're just a human, many things can seem so catastrophically bad that you might think you're never going to come back. At one point, we owed $2 million to our manufacturers. A company had tried to acquire us, and we said no, so then they decided to sue us, right? And then I had to lay off a bunch of our team. That amount of stress is so incredibly stressful, but we were lucky because it was, at the end of the day, cash, right, and being able to do the right thing. And so we ended up working really, really hard to try to bring in additional dollars through joint development agreements and through other pathways. At the end of the day, we ended up doing a couple very large partnerships with a company like Johnson & Johnson, a large consumer health company, ended up paying up all of our debts, ended up settling the lawsuit and sort of getting to the end and being like, this is all okay. So I would just say, if you are starting a company, there will be an infinite number of things that seem like they're going to end your company or sort of torpedo the whole effort. I would challenge, though, and say you can pretty much recover from most things, right? Death, no. Like a terminal illness, no. But in terms of building a company, you can fix pretty much everything. One of the reasons I also believe this is that I think that people are really the most important thing, right? So when we were so deep in debt and we were in the middle of a lawsuit, I was really lucky and had core team members who stayed with me to keep working, even though they weren't receiving salaries, right? And so people who have put themselves out on the line, who just showed up every day, helped me figure out how to advance the product, still answering customer support calls because we were still selling product, and really just continuing to go. And I think that if you are a person who believes that teamwork is really important for companies, and I do, you really need to invest in your people and do everything you can, I think, to build the best possible team, because that will help you leverage your resources in the best possible way. Beyond that, I would just say my last lesson from Rest Devices is that tenacity and hard work can get you far, but not the whole way, right? So we were in a niche market, as I mentioned. We were targeting family products. We were targeting moms, and ultimately most venture investors, I think still to this day, would say, that's terrific. I think that's too small of a market. I personally think that's wrong, but markets are markets. But the more important thing, I think, in addition to that, was that at the end, none of us believed in the work that we were doing, right? Like, I think that we had worked so hard to right-side the company, to be able to be cash flow positive, to keep rebuilding the team. But for my founders, they didn't love the work that they were doing. And at that point, they were still very young, right? Like, they were 28, 29 years old. And I didn't feel, as a founder and a CEO, that I should keep them with me if their hearts weren't in it. So I went to our board and I said, hey, actually, I think that we've done everything we can with this company. I'm going to be able to return some capital to you. It's not going to be a 10x return. But I don't think that we should keep doing this anymore because no one's hearts are in it. And my board was wonderful, and they said, that's fine. We expected you to wind down the company 5 years ago when everything was so incredibly crappy. Sell what you can, do what you can, and get it done. So I would say that, looking back, I think that we made a real go of it in terms from a company building perspective. But I think that you need to be fully all in on what you're doing, because building a company is so stressful and so hard that there has to be that alignment, I think, between your heart and what your brain wants to do and actually what your market's going to be able to deliver. So that wrapped up in 2020. Over the course of that time, I had actually had 3 kids. I hadn't taken any maternity leave, so I just continued working as I sort of had my babies, which was great. And I thought that I was going to take some time and take a break. And I made it about 2 weeks and then realized this is incredibly boring, and what am I doing? So I was really lucky because one of my investors was this woman named Katie Ray. She is the CEO and the managing partner for a venture capital firm called The Engine. And that's based in Boston. It's affiliated with MIT. They do what's called tough tech investing or deep tech, which is what the rest of the world knows it. And so I ended up calling her, started right as COVID was starting in March of 2020, and ended up working there until the end of 2022. Katie wanted me to come, and she was wonderful. It was a great opportunity because I had been through so much at Rest Devices, and she was like, I think you can help our founders think about how to build their companies more intelligently. And my goal was just to figure out how to help people not make the same mistakes, right? If I had made an infinite number of mistakes, how could I help people not do the exact same mistakes I had made, right? That said, when I was getting started, I had developed what I would call this sort of anti-venture capital mindset when I was a founder, probably because I had had like a pretty gendered experience with venture capital markets. And so I called one of my mentors and I said, am I selling out, right? Am I doing this terrible thing that I don't really respect, that I think is actually kind of harmful to the founder community? And what am I doing? And he said, Dulcie, I don't think you're going to be a venture capitalist long term. However, you get to go and meet incredibly smart people. You get to go and help founders, which is what you care about the most. You get to have a paycheck and not worry about where it's coming from. So go and relax and do good work. And it's okay to be less stressed out, right? And he also was like, also of all of the venture teams in the world, The Engine with Katie and Reed and the team there are probably the most founder-positive venture capitalists that there are. So I went, right, sort of feeling like I was dying a little bit inside. And it was amazing because I got to see the world of founding companies on the other side of the table, right? Who here is a venture capitalist? Are any of you VCs? I thought you guys were based off of your facial reactions. Anyone else? Okay, so these three guys right here, well, no, you're smiling knowingly. I think that for venture capitalists, for people who aren't VCs, it's mythical, right? You're like, oh, how do they decide which idea is a great one? How do they decide which founders are the right one? What's the right market? I am not a great investor, to be clear. Like, I don't have it in my heart to be an investor. It is so hard for me to tell people no over and over and over again. But for a founder, going and sitting at the table with people who are allocating capital was incredibly beneficial, right? And so here's what I learned. One, first impressions matter, right? You get one opportunity to get into someone's calendar for a pitch. It will probably be 30 minutes. If you're lucky, someone will say, oh, that was interesting enough that I will take it to my weekly deal meeting. It will be put on a slide with somewhere between 10 and 40 other companies where the partners will debate whether or not they think you're interesting. Then they will take that and they will decide whether or not you get a second pitch, and then you'll be in diligence for a while. And then if you're lucky, you'll go to all the partners, then you'll make it through deal optics, and then you might get a check. That is a crazy number of probabilities that have to happen in sequence to actually get money from a venture capitalist. It is impossibly hard. So nail it out of the gate, right? First of all, you never know who you're talking to. If you're someplace here, you never know who's going to be the person across the coffee line sitting next to you. I, as a human, am incredibly candid and overly informal. It is a constant reminder to be professional and to keep it sort of buttoned up with everyone that I talk to. That might be uniquely American, I don't know, but think about it. In addition, bring your A game, right? So be on time, all the basic stuff, but in addition, you have to nail why you are doing what you're doing. What is your market? Who is your team? What's your go-to-market? What's your technology? What's your IP, right? Before you take your first meeting with an investor, have a bunch of throwaway meetings with mentors, advisors, friends. Make all of your terrible mistakes before you get to the meeting, right? But just don't blow your chance because you were underprepared. The number two thing that builds off of that is, I think, storytelling. As a founder, I was fairly dismissive, I think, of storytelling until I met this woman at The Engine named Fran Barros. Fran is a visual artist. And she really thinks about storytelling as one of the key pieces to how founders can be more effective in what they're doing. And that is taking whatever it is that you're building. It could be your technology, it could be your market, it could be your team, right? And thinking about how do you tell that story in a way that engages with people around you? How do you connect with people? How do you deliver your information in a really impactful way? Fran is someone who I think, with the work of all the people around her, she is really excellent at visual media. And so one of the first things she'll tell any founding team to do is do a lightweight branding exercise so you can work on your slides, you can work on your visual medium, and help convey what you need to do. To anyone who's going out and looking to raise money and looking to, I think, build a big company, take the time early on to invest in this. It's really easy to put together a pretty crappy PowerPoint presentation deck. It takes more time to do something that I think is beautiful and thoughtful and has a beginning, start, and end, and take the time to really think about what you're saying and how you're going to say it. There are lots of resources for, I think, low-cost design elements that you can think through. I think this is the most important thing, so find your market. I was subject to this in my first company. We were a niche, super complex product in a very in a smaller market. I think a lot of people come out of universities, come out of just whatever their backgrounds are, and think that they can raise money, especially from VCs, in a smaller market. It's not worth your time, right? Unless you are many hundreds of billions of dollars, certainly tens of billions of dollars for an entry market. I would really not even go and try to raise money unless you have a humongous market where you're going to be able to make a dent. It is easy to tell yourself as a founder, but my market is so important. I'm getting feedback from customers. I know that there is demand, but unless you are really going to be in a huge market, don't talk to investors. Find another way to build your company. If you're going to bring venture capitalists onto your cap table, you should only do it if you want to play the game and build such a large company with such large revenues that it makes it worthwhile. There are other ways to think about how to get to market if you're not in a venture market, okay? I beat my head against the wall so many times with REST devices trying to figure out how to make it work, and it was ultimately just not worth it. If I could go back in time to 2011 and say to myself, don't raise money, figure out how to bootstrap, figure out how to do this a different way, I would totally do it. And so I would think about that. Lastly, or this might be second to last, but build your networks, right? So one of the best things about the engine is it has a three-part model. There's capital. They've raised just about $1 billion. There's infrastructure. They have this lab where you can go and you can run multi-different forms of CNC machines and mills and complex bio equipment. The last part is the networks, right? So when I was brought onto the engine, part of what my job was to help portfolio companies and also the networks. And that included looking at corporates who might be able to invest in companies, who might be able to do joint development agreements, who might be able to do sales pilots, and who ultimately could think about M&A, right? Although I think that's hopefully not the pathway for many of our companies. That same mentor who told me that I wasn't selling my soul when I went to the engine said, go and meet as many people as possible, right? Go meet the CEO of IBM. Go meet all of the different founders that you will want to talk to once you start your next company. Go meet XYZ corporates, XYZ government people, et cetera. Because you never know, right? Going back to people are the most important resource. I have no idea what all of you do. I don't know your names. But you never know if someone's going to cross paths with you later in life, and if they could be really impactful in some way, right? And being at some place like the Engine, or even being at a conference like this, the opportunity to meet those people and make that connections is so important. You have no idea, I think, when those will come to bear. And lastly, this is going to sound trite, but my chief of staff told me to include this. But company building is not as hard as it seems. So when I was at the Engine, there were 35 portfolio companies maybe at the time, and some of them were, nuclear physicists in intellectual realms that I could never even dream to be of. Some of them were computer scientists where I was like, oh my God, and some of them were just regular people, right? Where I was like, oh, right, anyone can start a company. Anyone can be both smart and stupid enough to go and build a company, because you kind of have to be insane. And I think that the prospect of being, at least in the United States, and I think increasingly around the rest of the world, there's this mythology around founders, right? Where if you're starting a company, it can be this amazing thing, and it's so hard, and it's so special. And that might be true, but also it's not. If you have something that you really care about, and if you're crazy enough to take all the risk, of which there is so much risk, go build a company, right? We need more builders. It is entirely worthwhile to figure out how to do this and how to do it together. So if you're thinking about starting a company, don't get in your head and psych yourself out. Okay, I would highly recommend, if you want to start a company, go start a company. Okay, so at the end of the engine, basically it was at the very end of 2022, my co-founder for my next company, Dig Energy, which it's worth noting is also my husband, we had bootstrapped the early tech development for the new company on my salary from the engine. And I just want to tell you a little bit about why we're starting this company. So the things I really cared about from Rest, right? If you go back to what I said earlier, what's the market that's going to be a huge market where we can build a huge company? And two, what's a mission that will get us out of bed every day, bringing everyone around us to think about what are we going to do? How are we going to try to change it? How can we really galvanize what we need to do and unite a bunch of people to make change? I was not going to end up in a niche wearable consumer electronics market. I think one of the things that I think about, and we've heard a lot about it over the course of the last 2 days, is clean energy, right? So in a world where we don't have enough energy, how do we actually think about the energy transition and doing things in a more sustainable way? I have 4 kids, so I care a lot about making sure there's a future for them, as well as for my grandkids and for everyone else, right? So how do we build a world that can get us from here to there? And when we thought about building this company, we really thought about a couple things, which was one, what's the market? 2, what are we going to be helpful and actually be able to do something in? And 3, what's inspiring? Thomas, who's my co-founder, really thought about, I don't want to change particles to be able to build our company, right? Don't want to do fusion, don't want to do fission, don't want to do nuclear. We're not going to do anything crazy with hydrogen. We don't want to do anything that's going to take decades of R&D to get to market. At which point then, when you think about baseload energy sources, the thing that sort of popped up was geothermal energy, right? So using basically the energy that's stored in the earth to think about using that as an energy source. I was lucky to be a board observer for a company called Quaise while I was at the engine. They're using plasma to drill 20 miles into the earth. We did not want to do that. You can do crazy R&D stuff with geothermal. Again, it was how quickly can we get to market? What's going to be the biggest market? And so we thought about thermal applications of geothermal, right? How can you use heating and cooling to create a better world? And it turns out, and people here have known this forever, is that everyone can and should be using geothermal to heat and cool their buildings. However, it's super expensive. That's primarily because drilling has been super expensive. And so as we were wrapping up Rest Devices in 2020, Thomas went and figured out a better way to drill that would cost about 90% less, right? And so thinking about how you could do that. Dig is basically looking to scale low-cost drilling technology to heat and cool the entire world, right? Huge market. It's trillions of dollars, right? And then do we think that heating and cooling is a space that we can make impact? 100%. Is it inspiring? For me, yes. If we can sort of take all of the electrical and fossil fuel burning and put that towards something else or eradicate it, all day. So started the company. I wrapped up at the engine in December of 2022, right when I had our 4th kid, just as a personal anecdote. Had my first pitch that I didn't even know was going to be a pitch in February of 2023. I was not even thinking clearly. I wasn't sleeping. It was compelling enough somehow that then they asked for a partner meeting. And then I was lucky to go to the partner meeting, have enough of my storytelling done, get a term sheet, and start the company. It was way faster than I was anticipating, and I would say that has been both good and bad. One, company building is really, 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 really hard. And I say this more just to remind yourself, if you're going to do this, if you're going to go start a company, just know that you are pushing a boulder up a hill, right? It is going to be hard every day for 1,000 different reasons. It could be hard for reasons that you can control, right? Like we were for the first 2 years in real R&D risk land, where, have any of you worked in research and development? Anyone? No? No one? Oh my God. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Where you might be able to predict timelines, and if you can think that something's going to, you're going to be able to figure something out, but realistically, you can't, right? You have to just keep iterating and trying. You might have a US presidential election that totally implodes all of the climate policies of your entire country and freezes all of your capital markets. Or you could have, anything else sort of pop up along the way. So there are both things that you can control and things that you can't control. Chances are most things will go wrong anyways, but you want to do it because the mission is there, right? 3 minutes left. OK, this is the other part. So stay true to your vision, right? So I wanted to do something that was inspiring. We are doing that. I fully believe in the mission and the vision of what Dig Energy is doing. I would say, however, that you will get all of this input from people around you, from investors and otherwise, saying, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? Is this really that important? And I think you have to stay true to your vision and what you're trying to do because you believe in it, right? I think it's easy as a founder to be coachable and redirect yourself based off of feedback from the market. You want to do that to some extent, right? Like when we're thinking about our go-to-market market, it's really hard to figure that out. But you have to stay true to what you want to do because you want to be doing it. And that might sound like a platitude, but I really think it's true. If you're a founder and you're getting told no over and over and over, if you're being told that what you're doing actually isn't that impactful, I think it can be easy to get into your head and say, am I doing the wrong thing? At the end of the day, you just have to have conviction that what you're doing is the right thing. I think following on that, really think about filling your gaps, right? As I mentioned, I'm not technical in any way, shape, or form. Thomas, my co-founder, is a true blue R&D engineer. Like he is thinking about the future, whatever is happening in the future. That's wonderful. And I was like, Thomas, do you also want to hire the team and build the timelines? And he was like, no, I can't think of anything worse. So we ended up hiring a VP of engineering earlier than most early stage companies would. I also surrounded ourselves with technical advisors, including some really, really renowned technologists who are in the field of drilling, to try to even out, I think, Thomas's very creative brain with things that are rooted in the world and rooted in how we build products and how we get to market. I think there are some founders. You could think about some of the big male American technologists who think that their way is the only way to go, and they don't need any impact. But even if you think about Mark Zuckerberg with Sheryl Sandberg, there are people who need coaching, who need guidance. And I think it is OK to surround yourself with mentors, advisors, teammates who are better than you. My philosophy is you should always be surrounded by people who I think are smarter than you and teach you more, and so really lean into that. And last but not least, go for it, right? This is all a crazy thing to do. Being at a startup workshop is crazy. Horrible things are happening in the world. No one needs to have that underscored more for them. I think that if you think about making an impact, and if you can do it through company building, through, I think, mission-oriented technology, it's a truly amazing thing to do. I'm happy to have anyone contact me. This is my email. And have a great rest of your workshop. Thanks, everybody.